Hi Hugo, it's Chad Habel from the University of Adelaide. Thanks for your email with your questions about game-based learning. Happy to answer them. I'll do them in this video and then you can follow up with any other questions or anything else you want to know. Just to recap, your questions are: what are your thoughts on the usage of games for educational use as a senior lecturer? Do non-educational games such as Call of Duty have a positive learning effect on teenagers? And if so, how does it affect the teenager? 3, there are positive sides to playing games like Call of Duty, such as increase of hand-eye coordination, but do you think there is any use for these skills in a learning environment? 4, what are the best methods of teaching using games? And 5, how do you think game-based learning will look like in the future? So number 1, what are your thoughts on the usage of games for educational use as a senior lecturer? I think there's a huge amount of potential in games for game-based learning and educational games. As a senior lecturer at the University of Adelaide, I don't see it happening very soon at the university level. I think that more innovative approaches like that happen at lower levels first, in particularly early childhood and junior primary levels, and then going up through primary and high school. So I think there's a lot of potential there, but it's also a lot more difficult than people expect. So people tend to go, "Oh, games, they're fantastic, they're amazing, we use them for learning," and I don't think it's that easy. It takes a lot of expertise, a lot of particularly educational expertise and educational design to develop games properly for learning and to use games properly for learning. So it's not as easy as people think. It's also not a panacea, so it's not the perfect solution to all learning issues. It's not applicable to all contexts, it's not relevant to all learners, and it's not appropriate for all learning situations. There are some situations that it's very appropriate for and very useful for. But I think that games can help us rethink learning itself as well, which is an interesting thing. I'll get back to that later. Do non-educational games such as Call of Duty have a positive learning effect on teenagers? And if so, how does it affect the teenager? I don't really know, to be honest. I think so. I think there are positive effects of games on people generally. I think we need to be careful though, because if you're likely to say that there are positive effects of games, you need to also admit that there might be negative effects of games. So I think there are positive and negative effects of games on people of all ages, not just teenagers. So I think, yes, certainly there are things that can be learnt intuitively through these games. So in your next question, you mentioned hand-eye coordination, but I think there's lots of other things. Problem solving. There are a lot of social skills that people can learn through games. A game like Minecraft is kind of educational, but it's not actually an educational game. There's a lot of learning to happen there. I think that there are games for entertainment and that they can be used for learning purposes, but what they need some educational scaffolding. They need some curriculum designs. They need a teacher to actually work with it. And do a lot more to increase that potential. So I don't think it happens automatically. How do games affect the teenager? As I said, I think games can affect people positively and negatively. I think the most important thing is that people have boundaries around their gaming, and that when you have a lack of boundaries and when you have an individual who is unable to set their own boundaries around gaming, then you've got problems. So I think one of the biggest negative problems with gaming can be the potential for addiction. I think that's a real thing, and I think that's a bit of a concern. But that's a wider problem as well. The positive learning effects, I've kind of been through them a little bit, I guess. So broadly, that's what they are. This leads on to your next question. There are positive sides to playing games like Call of Duty, such as increase of hand-eye coordination. But do you think there is any use for these skills in a learning environment? Yeah, sure. I mean, hand-eye coordination is pretty important for some professions in particular. I mean, if you're an artist or an architect or something like that. Obviously, if you're a pilot or something like that, it's useful. There has been work to show that surgeons who grew up playing games tend to have much better surgery skills. So there are specific things like that. I think you're kind of focused on Call of Duty, right? I think that's an interesting thing, and I'd get you to ask yourself why you're so interested in Call of Duty. Is that the game you really, really like and you're trying to show that it has some learning benefits? If so, that you might want to just think that maybe that's largely a game that's good for entertainment. Some of the other things that you can learn from a game like Call of Duty, for example, might be working in teams or working in squads. There's some good background work done on the game America's Army, which was originally designed to teach soldiers how to move in squad formation and cover each other while they moved forward and things like that. So there are things like that. But to be honest, a game like Call of Duty, I think, is probably a little bit limited in its potential for learning. I mean, you might learn stuff through the narrative about history and things like that or whatever, but it's probably going to be fairly limited. There are lots of other games that have a lot more potential for learning. But I think that also we've got to go like, if it's entertainment, that's cool. There's nothing wrong with entertainment. People watch TV, they go to the movies, they play all sorts of games, they do all sorts of activities that don't necessarily have an inherent benefit. So we don't necessarily need to prove that every game has amazing learning outcomes. So I think it's enough to say that some games do, but probably, to be honest, Call of Duty might not be one of them. To be honest, that's my take on it. I like Call of Duty, by the way. I play Black Ops 3 and I play Battlefield as well. I love those games. I just don't think they're necessarily. I don't think we should really fit a square peg into a round hole, if you know what I mean. Don't try and make it something that it's not, because that's not going to persuade people. That's not the thing. What are the best methods of teaching using games? So this goes back to my approach to this. There's an important curriculum design approach to using games. I think what we need to do is be really. The biggest problem with using games in teaching is that people tend to use it as a bit of entertainment or as a bit of engagement. So they tend to go, oh yeah, it'll be fun for kids. You throw a game in, that's a bit of fun. They might use the game as a reward for doing another learning activity or something like that. That's highly problematic because I don't think it really has many learning benefits, and it really just, if a game is there for entertainment, that's fine, but if you're trying to make it something else, you need to do a lot more than that. So I think a curriculum design approach to this is essential. I think that what you need to do, so as educators or as a lecturer at university or a teacher, what you need to do is you need to identify your intended learning outcomes in your curriculum design. What do you want students to be able to learn? What do you want them to be able to walk out of the classroom with? And then you go, well, what are the activities that are going to help them achieve that? So you really need to have a very clear sense on what they're going to learn and how the game is going to support that. So you need a lot of kind of scaffolding, a lot of curriculum, a lot of like kind of lesson planning around it. So a really good example might be Angry Birds, for example. You could use Angry Birds to help teach classical mechanics very effectively, and that allows you to look at velocity, different types. So you can look at momentum. You can look at different types of kinetic and potential energy. You can look at displacement, trajectories, position, using concepts from classical mechanics like that. But those concepts don't come out. That learning doesn't happen just through playing Angry Birds itself. You need a teacher who's there to help explain the theories and concepts, to put the gameplay into a context, and to talk about these concepts and build some activities where students might be doing vector diagrams and calculating the effect of gravity on the Angry Bird as it's flying in a trajectory and a parabola and things like that. The short answer being, just playing the game itself doesn't create amazing learning. You need a really good teacher there to develop it, and then to run a class and deal with all of the technical and the learning challenges that are all associated with it to make that happen. So a quick answer to your question is, what are the best methods for teaching using games? Using a curriculum design framework, a focus on intended learning outcomes, and having a really good teacher who is able to use it as a tool. The game is not the end. It's not the only thing there. It's just a tool for effective learning. I think that's the most important thing. How do I think game-based learning will look like in the future? I think it's going to be more ubiquitous. So it's going to be everywhere. We're going to see it more and more introduced into classrooms and schools and universities everywhere. I think it's going to be less, here we're going to be using a game. I think the curriculum itself will become more like a game. So we'll have more gamified curricula. Okay, the split between work and play is going to break down. I think that's a big thing that will happen. I think the biggest shift that will happen, and I think the most important shift to happen is, excuse me for a moment. I think the most important thing to happen and the biggest shift that will happen is rather than having a game that you give to students to play and then hope that some magical learning happens, there's going to be much more of a focus on what students are doing when they're either playing a game or actually creating a game. So what I'm hoping is that we actually see more of a focus on, a thing I'm involved with called the Australian STEM Video Game Challenge, where high school students, create a video game and therefore develop their STEM learning, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics learning through the creation of the video game. So that's the kind of thing I'd like to see a lot more of. So rather than having students play a game and learn something from it, it's going to be they're involved in a platform and they build something. They create something themselves, maybe a game, maybe an artifact, maybe something like that. So a good example of this is Minecraft, for example. Minecraft, fantastic game. The learning potential there is amazing because the player is building something. So when you've got a player who's building something and doing something, and then you get them together in teams doing that, then there's huge potential there. So I think we'll see more of that. Game-based learning in the future will also come more into mobile space as well, I think. So we'll see less of a focus on big high-end PCs and consoles like the Xbox and the PlayStation, and we'll see more platform agnostic games, I guess. So a game that can be played on any platform, and particularly mobile games. So you'll see people on their phones and on their devices being involved in things that might look like games. They might not look traditionally like games, but they're learning activities that are kind of gamified. So I think a lot of the barriers are going to break down between game and non-game, between curriculum and gaming activity, between platforms, between different types of players. We'll see a breakdown between the teacher and the student roles as well. That teachers will become more of a facilitator of learning when students are learning in these ways through creating things through games and things like that. So that's kind of how I can see things changing in the future. Hopefully that's been useful for you, Hugo. That's about 12 and a half minutes. So hopefully those answers are useful for your research project at the moment. If you've got further questions, feel free to flick them through, and I can answer. I can do another video with some more questions for you if you like. So good luck with your project, and I hope that's been useful. Thanks.